The morning sun cast long shadows through the glass atrium of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, illuminating the marble floors where delegates from across the world had walked in pursuit of justice. The building itself stood as a monument to international law, its modern architecture symbolizing humanity's attempt to create accountability beyond national borders. Dr. Isabella Romano walked through the security checkpoint with the measured steps of someone accustomed to institutional environments. At 52, she possessed the refined elegance common among European academics, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a classical chignon. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a cream silk blouse, her appearance carefully crafted to project scholarly authority without drawing unnecessary attention. To the court officials and observers gathering for the morning session, Isabella represented exactly what her credentials indicated: Professor Emeritus of Renaissance Art History at the University of Rome, recognized expert in wartime art recovery, and consultant to multiple international organizations dealing with cultural property disputes. Her reputation was impeccable, her scholarship renowned, and her testimony highly sought after in cases involving Nazi-looted art. What none of them knew was that her expertise in art recovery wasn't purely academic. The case drawing such international attention was Rosenberg et al. v. The Vatican Museums, a landmark lawsuit seeking the return of Renaissance masterpieces allegedly stolen by Nazi forces and subsequently acquired by the Vatican through questionable channels. The plaintiffs represented families whose collections had been systematically looted during the war, while the Vatican maintained that their acquisitions had been legitimate purchases from established dealers. Judge Marianne van der Burg called the court to order with the gravity befitting her position as one of Europe's most respected jurists. The Dutch magistrate had presided over some of the court's most significant cases involving crimes against humanity, and her reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for procedural irregularities. Isabella took her designated seat in the expert witness section, opening a leather portfolio that contained decades of research on wartime art trafficking. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she arranged her materials, each document bearing the weight of historical investigation that had occupied the last 20 years of her academic career. Or so it appeared. The morning's testimony focused on establishing the provenance of three specific paintings: a Caravaggio depicting the Annunciation, a Botticelli portrait of an unknown noble, and a Fra Angelico altarpiece that had disappeared from a Florentine church in 1943. Each work was worth millions, but their true value lay in what they represented: the systematic cultural destruction that had accompanied Nazi occupation. As expert witnesses testified about authentication techniques, Isabella listened with the careful attention of someone whose knowledge went far beyond academic study. When Dr. Heinrich Müller, the Vatican's chief art historian, described the Church's acquisition procedures, she made notes that seemed scholarly but contained observations that only someone with operational experience would recognize as significant. The Vatican's defense was sophisticated and well-prepared. Their attorneys had assembled documentation showing legitimate purchase agreements, export permits, and authentication certificates that appeared to establish clear title to the disputed works. Vatican officials testified about their long history of protecting art during wartime, positioning themselves as preservers rather than exploiters of cultural heritage. But Isabella saw inconsistencies that others missed. The timing of certain acquisitions, the routing of payment transfers, the sudden appearance of works that had been missing for decades, patterns that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. During the lunch recess, she remained in the courtroom, ostensibly reviewing her notes for the afternoon session. In reality, she was conducting the kind of threat assessment that had become second nature during years of operational work. The security arrangements, the placement of various officials, the technology being used to record proceedings, details that mattered when you understood how information could be weaponized. Judge van der Burg returned precisely at 2 p.m., calling the afternoon session to order. The court will now hear from Dr. Isabella Romano, expert in Renaissance art and wartime cultural property recovery. Isabella rose and approached the witness stand with perfect composure, taking the oath with words that carried the weight of secrets she could never fully disclose. Dr. Romano, began Prosecutor Elena Vasquez, a formidable Spanish attorney representing the plaintiffs, please describe your qualifications to testify about Nazi art looting and recovery. I hold a doctorate in art history from the University of Rome, specializing in Renaissance painting and provenance research, Isabella replied, her accented English precise and authoritative. I have spent over 20 years investigating the movement of cultural property during and after World War II. What she didn't mention was how much of that investigation had involved direct participation in recovery operations that remained classified at the highest levels of European intelligence services. Isabella's testimony was methodical and devastating. She presented evidence of systematic Nazi art looting that went far beyond what most historians had documented, describing networks of dealers, transporters, and storage facilities that had operated across occupied Europe. The Nazi cultural appropriation program was not random theft, she explained, gesturing to projected images of looted collections. It was systematic industrial harvesting designed to strip occupied territories of their cultural identity while funding the war machine. She detailed how major artworks had been catalogued, photographed, and transported to repositories in Germany and Austria, where they had been sorted for distribution to Nazi officials, sold on international markets, or simply disappeared into private collections. The challenge for post-war recovery efforts, Isabella continued, has been that many works entered legitimate markets through seemingly proper channels. Dealers who collaborated with Nazi authorities continued operating after the war, creating documentation that appeared to establish clear provenance while concealing the true origins of their inventory. Vatican attorney Marco Benedetti rose to cross-examine. His approach was respectful but probing, clearly designed to undermine her credibility by highlighting the speculative nature of her conclusions. Dr. Romano, your testimony contains many allegations about systematic deception by art dealers and cultural institutions. Do you have direct evidence supporting these claims? Isabella met his gaze steadily. Mr. Benedetti, the nature of wartime art trafficking was such that participants took great care to obscure their activities. However, patterns of acquisition, movement, and documentation create evidentiary trails that trained investigators can follow. Trained investigators, Benedetti repeated. You describe yourself as an academic art historian. What specific training in criminal investigation do you possess? It was a careful trap, designed to highlight the limitations of academic research in proving criminal activity. But Isabella had been expecting this line of questioning. My research methodology includes archival investigation, document analysis, and coordination with law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions. The techniques used to trace stolen art often parallel those used in financial crime investigation. The answer was technically accurate while revealing nothing about her actual background in intelligence operations. Benedetti pressed his advantage. But you have no formal law enforcement training, no official investigative authority, and no access to classified materials that might provide direct evidence of the activities you describe. Isabella paused, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Benedetti, much of the evidence regarding wartime art trafficking exists in archives that require appropriate clearances and institutional cooperation to access. My work has been conducted in coordination with various government agencies and international organizations. The exchange continued for another hour, with Benedetti attempting to portray Isabella as an academic activist whose conclusions exceeded her evidence, while Prosecutor Vasquez worked to establish the reliability of her methodology and the significance of her findings. Throughout the questioning, Isabella maintained perfect composure, answering with scholarly precision while revealing nothing about the operational knowledge that informed her analysis. She had testified in similar proceedings before, always walking the careful line between academic expertise and classified experience. As the afternoon session neared its conclusion, Judge van der Berg made an unexpected announcement. Before we adjourn, the court will implement enhanced security protocols for tomorrow's proceedings. All persons present will be subject to additional screening measures. The request seemed routine, but Isabella noticed several things that suggested heightened concern. Additional security personnel had appeared in the gallery, electronic surveillance equipment had been moved to new positions, and court officials were paying closer attention to the movements of expert witnesses. Something had triggered institutional paranoia, and experience told Isabella that she was likely the cause. Isabella stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. With practiced efficiency, she removed her charcoal blazer, folding it neatly and placing it on the nearby chair. Beneath the jacket, she wore a cream silk blouse with three-quarter sleeves. On her left arm, just below the shoulder, a small tattoo was clearly visible. The design was elegant and understated, a Vatican shield in black ink, featuring the crossed keys of St. Peter beneath a papal tiara. Above the shield, 3 small stars were arranged in a triangle. To most observers, it might have appeared to be a simple expression of Catholic faith or Italian heritage. But Judge van der Burg's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Her face went pale as she stared at the tattoo, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. For several seconds, the only sound in the courtroom was the whisper of the air circulation system. "That's not possible," the judge whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the silent chamber. Vatican attorney Benedetti looked confused, glancing between Isabella and the judge's reaction. Prosecutor Vasquez appeared equally puzzled, while court security officers exchanged uncertain looks. But Cardinal Torretti's response was different. The elderly Vatican official stared at Isabella's tattoo with growing recognition and what appeared to be fear. Isabella remained standing beside the witness chair, making no attempt to cover the tattoo or explain its significance. Instead, she met Judge van der Burg's gaze directly, and in that exchange, 40 years of hidden history passed between them. The Vatican shield with 3 stars was the identification mark of Operation Raphael, the most classified art recovery program in post-war European history. Those who bore that mark had been part of a joint Vatican-Italian intelligence initiative that had recovered thousands of artworks while simultaneously covering up evidence of wartime collaboration that would have destroyed the Church's moral authority. Judge van der Burg had encountered that symbol only once before, in a classified briefing when she was a young prosecutor working on war crimes cases in the 1980s. She had been told that fewer than 30 people had ever been authorized to bear that mark, and that all related operations had been terminated and records destroyed following the end of the Cold War. Yet here sat Dr. Isabella Romano, distinguished academic and expert witness, bearing the unmistakable mark of one of Europe's most secret intelligence programs. "Court will recess for 30 minutes, Judge van der Burg announced, her voice strained. "Dr. Romano, please remain available to the court." As the courtroom cleared, Isabella calmly put her jacket back on, covering the tattoo. But the revelation had fundamentally changed the nature of the proceedings. The quiet academic who had been providing expert testimony was actually a former intelligence operative whose knowledge went far beyond scholarly research. Cardinal Torretti approached as she gathered her papers. "Dottoressa Romano," he said quietly in Italian, his voice carrying a mixture of recognition and apprehension. "I had hoped we would never meet under these circumstances." Isabella looked up at him with calm acknowledgement. "Your Eminence. Some secrets have a way of surfacing, regardless of our preferences." In Judge van der Burg's private chambers, an emergency consultation was underway. Present were the judge, Court Security Chief Willem de Vries, Prosecutor Vasquez, Vatican Attorney Benedetti, and a hastily summoned representative from the Dutch Ministry of Justice. "Judge," said Ministry Liaison Dr. Franz Kellner, "that symbol hasn't been seen in official contexts for over 30 years. If Dr. Romano is who that tattoo suggests she is, we have a significant security situation." Van der Burg paced behind her desk. "Franz, I was present at the briefing where they told us Operation Raphael had been completely terminated. All assets were supposed to have been extracted or retired from active status." "Apparently not all of them," de Vries observed grimly. "The question is whether Dr. Romano is a compromised asset or if she's been operating under deep cover this entire time." Prosecutor Vasquez looked confused. "I need someone to explain what Operation Raphael was and why it matters to my art restitution case." Dr. Kellner activated a secure communication device. "I'm contacting current intelligence services. If Dr. Romano is legitimate, they'll need to confirm her status. If she's not..." The implications hung unspoken in the air. Meanwhile, in a secure conference room adjacent to the courtroom, Isabella sat alone for the first time in decades with her true identity partially exposed. She had spent 40 years building and maintaining her academic cover, becoming one of Europe's most respected art historians while never revealing that she had participated in many of the recovery operations she studied. The irony was not lost on her. Her testimony about Vatican art acquisitions was based on her direct knowledge as an operative who had facilitated many of those transactions. She had watched systematic deception unfold because she had been part of orchestrating it. An hour later, Isabella was escorted to a different secure facility within the International Criminal Court complex. The room was windowless and equipped with sophisticated electronic countermeasures, clearly designed for sensitive conversations. Waiting for her were Judge van der Berg, Dr. Kellner from the Dutch Ministry of Justice, and a woman Isabella didn't recognize but whose bearing and attire clearly indicated intelligence service affiliation. Dr. Romano, the unknown woman began, "I am Director Sarah Mitchell from the European Intelligence Coordination Center. We need to understand exactly who you are and what your presence in this courtroom represents." Isabella studied the three officials for a moment before responding. "Director Mitchell, I assume you've already run background checks and confirmed my academic credentials are genuine." "We have. Professor Isabella Romano has an impeccable record as an art historian and cultural property expert. What we want to know is whether that identity represents your entire background." Isabella smiled slightly, the first time she had shown any emotion since her tattoo was exposed. "Director, the Vatican shield with 3 stars was never awarded to academics." Judge van der Berg leaned forward. "Isabella, I need you to understand the legal situation. This court is hearing a case involving Vatican art acquisitions and potential war crimes. If you have direct knowledge of those activities that goes beyond academic research, it could fundamentally change these proceedings. And it could also expose operations that remain classified and compromise individuals who are still alive," Isabella replied evenly. Dr. Kellner consulted a secure tablet. "Dr. Romano, our records show that Operation Raphael was officially terminated in 1991. All associated personnel were supposed to have been debriefed and their cover identities retired." "That's correct," Isabella confirmed. "I was debriefed and my operational status was terminated. Isabella Romano the academic became my permanent identity." Director Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "But you maintained the tattoo." "The tattoo was never intended to be permanent identification. It was applied during a specific operation and was supposed to be removed afterward. Circumstances prevented that from happening." Isabella paused, choosing her words carefully. "For 40 years, I have lived as Dr. Isabella Romano, academic art historian. My operational identity was completely compartmentalized. Until today, no one has questioned that separation." Judge van der Berg struggled with the implications. "Isabella, if you have direct operational knowledge of Vatican art acquisitions during and after the war, you may be legally obligated to disclose that information." "Your Honor, my operational knowledge is protected by classification levels that supersede this court's jurisdiction. I cannot and will not disclose information that could compromise ongoing operations or endanger personnel." That evening, in a secure facility outside The Hague, Isabella sat across from Director Mitchell and a small team of intelligence officials from various European services. For the first time in 40 years, she was prepared to discuss her operational background. "Operation Raphael began in 1946, Isabella began, her voice taking on the precise tone of a professional briefing. The objective was to recover Nazi-looted art while simultaneously protecting the Vatican from exposure regarding wartime collaboration that could have destabilized the entire Catholic Church." She paused, organizing decades of classified memories. "I was recruited in 1978 while completing my doctorate at the University of Rome. My academic focus on Renaissance art made me an ideal candidate for deep cover operations involving cultural property." Director Mitchell consulted classified files that had been hastily retrieved from various intelligence archives. According to these records, Operation Raphael was considered one of the most successful cultural recovery operations of the post-war period. "It was successful because it served multiple purposes simultaneously," Isabella confirmed. "We recovered thousands of stolen artworks, returned many to their rightful owners, and prevented the exposure of Vatican activities that would have created massive political instability throughout Europe. Isabella's transformation from graduate student to deep-cover operative had been gradual and carefully orchestrated. Over several years, she had been introduced to art dealers, collectors, and Vatican officials who were managing the complex process of post-war cultural property recovery. By 1982, I was providing authentication services and provenance research for artworks that were being quietly returned to their countries of origin, Isabella continued. The Vatican's public position was that they had been protecting art during the war. The reality was more complicated. The true complexity of Operation Raphael lay in its dual mission. While genuinely working to recover and return stolen art, the program also served to manage the flow of information about wartime Vatican activities in ways that protected the Church's reputation and political position. The Vatican had indeed protected many artworks during the war, Isabella explained. But they had also acquired pieces through dealers who were collaborating with Nazi authorities, and they had provided sanctuary to individuals who were involved in systematic looting operations. She described how Vatican officials had walked a careful line between moral obligation and political necessity, working to return stolen art while ensuring that evidence of their own wartime compromises remained hidden. My role evolved over time from simple authentication work to managing complex negotiations between the Vatican, various governments, and private collectors. By the late 1980s, I was effectively coordinating the entire Western European art recovery network. Director Mitchell leaned forward. Are you saying that Vatican art acquisitions during the 1980s and 1990s were part of ongoing recovery operations rather than normal collecting activities? Many were, though the distinction wasn't always clear. When artwork surfaced on the private market with questionable provenance, we would arrange for their acquisition by institutions that could provide appropriate security and accessibility while research into their ownership continued. Isabella revealed that her academic career had been the perfect cover for maintaining contact with art dealers, collectors, and institutional officials across Europe. Her scholarly reputation provided credibility for her assessments while her operational training allowed her to recognize patterns and connections that pure academics would miss. The current case involving the Vatican museums, Isabella continued, includes artworks that I personally helped authenticate and place during recovery operations in the 1980s. The plaintiffs' families are correct that these pieces were stolen by Nazi authorities. But their acquisition by the Vatican was part of a recovery operation intended to eventually return them to their rightful owners. Then why hasn't the Vatican simply returned them? Judge van der Berg asked. Isabella's expression grew somber. Because doing so would require acknowledging the existence of Operation Raphael and explaining how the Vatican came to possess detailed information about Nazi art trafficking networks. Such disclosures would expose intelligence operations that involved multiple governments and compromise individuals who are still alive. The secure debriefing continued through the night as Isabella provided details about Operation Raphael that had never been officially recorded. Her academic career had been the perfect cover for monitoring the long-term consequences of wartime art trafficking and managing the gradual return of stolen cultural property. The current art restitution case is not an isolated incident, Isabella explained. Many of the Vatican's most valuable holdings include pieces that were recovered through Operation Raphael but cannot be returned without exposing the intelligence operations that made their recovery possible. She described how art dealers and collectors had systematically exploited legal ambiguities to retain possession of stolen works, how authentication processes had been manipulated to obscure true provenance, and how institutional collecting policies had been designed to provide legal cover for possessing questionable pieces. Dr. Romano, Director Mitchell asked, why did you choose to expose this information now? You could have maintained your cover indefinitely. Isabella considered the question carefully. Because the patterns I helped establish during Operation Raphael are being exploited by criminals and corrupt collectors today. Legal precedents that were designed to protect legitimate recovery operations are now being used to shield ongoing art trafficking. Isabella revealed that her testimony in the restitution case had been deliberately designed to expose these patterns. She had spent years documenting systematic abuses of cultural property law, preparing evidence, and waiting for the right opportunity to bring these issues to international attention. The Vatican Museum's case is not really about 3 paintings, she continued. It's a preview of what happens when institutions use classification and legal technicalities to avoid accountability for possessing stolen cultural property. Judge van der Berg grappled with the legal implications. Isabella, if your testimony today was based on direct operational knowledge rather than academic research, it fundamentally changes the nature of your evidence. Your Honor, my testimony was completely accurate regardless of its source. The question is whether the international legal system is prepared to acknowledge that some expert witnesses have backgrounds that go beyond traditional scholarship. Isabella's revelation raised profound questions about the relationship between intelligence operations and international legal institutions. How many other academic experts were actually former intelligence operatives? How much of the historical record was based on sanitized versions of operational reports? How could international courts obtain accurate information when intelligence services had systematic reasons to withhold or distort evidence? After 3 days of closed-door consultations involving multiple governments and intelligence services, Judge van der Berg reconvened the court for an unprecedented session. Present were the original participants in the art restitution case, plus additional officials from various European intelligence services and diplomatic representatives from several countries. This court faces an extraordinary situation, Judge van der Berg announced. We have received testimony from a witness whose qualifications to provide that testimony extend far beyond what was initially disclosed. Isabella sat in the witness chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had replaced her academic attire with a more formal business suit, and she no longer made any attempt to conceal the tattoo on her arm when her jacket was removed for security screening. Dr. Romano, Judge van der Berg continued, you have confirmed that your testimony was based not only on academic research but also on direct operational experience with art recovery activities relevant to this case. That is correct, Your Honor. And you have indicated that providing full details of that operational experience would require clearances and authorizations beyond the scope of this court. Yes, Your Honor. However, I can confirm that my testimony regarding Vatican art acquisitions was completely accurate, regardless of its source. Vatican Attorney Benedetti stood. Your Honor, if Dr. Romano's testimony was based on classified intelligence operations, it should be excluded from these proceedings entirely. Such information cannot be verified or challenged through normal legal processes. Prosecutor Vasquez immediately objected. Your Honor, if Dr. Romano has direct knowledge of art recovery operations that included the disputed pieces, that information could be crucial to determining their rightful ownership. Isabella requested permission to address the court directly. Your Honor, for 40 years I have maintained a careful separation between my operational background and my academic career. Today, that separation has been compromised through circumstances beyond my control. She stood, her bearing shifting subtly but unmistakably from academic expert to intelligence professional. However, the substance of my testimony stands on its own merit. The Vatican did acquire stolen artworks through dealers who had collaborated with Nazi authorities. Recovery operations did include procedures designed to eventually return these pieces to their rightful owners. The evidence supporting these conclusions is available through academic sources, declassified documents, and institutional records. Isabella paused, choosing her final words carefully. The fact that some of us who study art recovery operations have direct experience with those operations should not disqualify our testimony. It should add credibility to our conclusions about institutional practices that continue to this day. Judge van der Berg delivered her ruling after a brief recess. This court accepts Dr. Romano's testimony as expert evidence based on her demonstrated expertise in art recovery operations, regardless of the source of that expertise. However, the court also recognizes that certain aspects of her background remain classified and cannot be explored in these proceedings. She turned to Isabella directly. Dr. Romano, your testimony has provided this court with crucial insights into art recovery operations that affected the pieces in dispute. That testimony will stand as part of the official record. The implications of the ruling extended far beyond the specific art restitution case. For the first time, an international court had officially acknowledged that expert witnesses might have operational backgrounds that enhanced rather than compromised their credibility. In the weeks following Isabella's testimony, the ripple effects spread throughout European art and intelligence communities. The revelation that a respected art historian had been a deep-cover operative for 4 decades raised questions about the relationship between scholarship and intelligence work. Isabella returned to her teaching position at the University of Rome, but her status had fundamentally changed. Students and colleagues who had known her as Dr. Isabella Romano, distinguished academic, now understood that her expertise was based on direct experience with the operations she had studied. The art restitution case continued, but Isabella's testimony had shifted its focus from simple ownership disputes to systematic institutional practices. Vatican attorneys could no longer claim ignorance about the provenance of disputed pieces, and prosecutors gained access to new avenues of investigation into intelligence service involvement in cultural property recovery. 3 months after her testimony, Isabella received a visit from Director Mitchell at her university office in Rome. Dr. Romano, several governments have requested formal debriefings about Operation Raphael and related activities. Isabella looked up from the historical manuscript she had been reviewing, her latest academic work on post-war cultural property recovery. Director, I've spent 40 years providing those governments with information through my academic work. Perhaps it's time they started reading it more carefully. Director Mitchell smiled slightly. Point taken. However, there are specific operational details that weren't included in your published research. Because those details remain classified, Isabella replied firmly. My academic work included everything that could be safely disclosed without compromising ongoing operations or endangering personnel. The conversation represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between intelligence services and academic institutions. Isabella had demonstrated that former operatives could transition successfully to academic careers while maintaining appropriate security protocols. There's another matter, Director Mitchell continued. Several universities have inquired about establishing formal programs where former intelligence personnel could transition to academic roles. Isabella considered this carefully. Such programs would need very careful structure to protect both operational security and academic integrity. But yes, there are probably others who could benefit from legitimate academic careers. A year after Isabella's courtroom revelation, the International Criminal Court hosted a conference on intelligence, academia, and international justice. Isabella was invited as the keynote speaker, representing a new model for the intersection of operational experience and scholarly expertise. The artificial separation between those who conduct intelligence operations and those who study them has served neither community well, Isabella told the assembled academics, legal professionals, and intelligence officials. She had spent the past year developing a framework for ethical integration of operational experience with academic scholarship, working with universities and intelligence services to create guidelines for former operatives who wished to pursue academic careers. Intelligence operations occur within historical contexts that benefit from scholarly analysis, she continued. Similarly, academic study of intelligence activities benefits from the insights of those who have direct operational experience. Isabella's model had gained support from unexpected quarters. Intelligence services appreciated having former operatives in academic positions where they could provide historical context for current operations. Universities valued the expertise that former operatives brought to intelligence studies programs. International legal institutions recognized the value of expert witnesses who could provide both scholarly analysis and operational insight. But the model also required careful safeguards. Former operatives entering academic careers had to undergo extensive security reviews to ensure they could distinguish between information that could be shared academically and details that must remain classified. Universities had to develop protocols for evaluating scholarship that might be based on classified sources. The Vatican shield tattoo that exposed my background was originally intended as temporary operational identification, Isabella concluded her keynote address. Instead, it became a permanent symbol of the connection between operational experience and historical understanding. She touched her arm where the tattoo remained visible beneath her sleeve. We cannot separate intelligence operations from their historical context, and we cannot fully understand that context without acknowledging the experiences of those who participated in creating it. 2 years after her revelation in the Hague courtroom, Isabella published her most significant work, The Raphael Files, Art Recovery and Historical Truth in Post-War Europe. The book, written with full authorization from multiple intelligence services, provided the first detailed account of a major art recovery operation by someone who had participated in it. The work established a new standard for intelligence history, combining rigorous academic methodology with authentic operational insight. It also served as a model for how classified information could be responsibly disclosed for historical purposes without compromising ongoing security interests. Isabella's university office had become a destination for former intelligence operatives considering academic careers. She had developed an informal network of advisors who helped former operatives navigate the transition from operational roles to scholarly positions. The key, she explained to a former CIA analyst who was considering a doctorate in art history, is understanding that your operational experience enhances your academic work rather than replacing it. You still need to meet the same scholarly standards as any other academic. Isabella had also become a consultant to international legal institutions seeking to improve their access to intelligence-related evidence. Her experience had demonstrated that former operatives could serve as expert witnesses while maintaining appropriate security protocols. The Vatican Museum's case that had exposed her background had concluded with several significant precedents, supported in part by Isabella's testimony about systematic art recovery operations. More importantly, the case had established new frameworks for how international courts could access intelligence-related evidence without compromising ongoing operations. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in Rome, Isabella sat in her apartment overlooking the Tiber, reviewing student papers on post-war European history. Many of her current students were unaware of her operational background, knowing her simply as a distinguished professor with remarkable insight into intelligence operations. Her phone rang with a call from Director Mitchell. "Isabella, we have a situation developing regarding art trafficking networks that has similarities to the patterns you exposed during Operation Raphael. Would you be available for consultation?" Isabella considered the request. At 54, she had officially retired from operational activities, but her expertise remained valuable for understanding how historical patterns might repeat in contemporary contexts. "Sarah, my consulting rate is quite reasonable, full academic credit for any resulting analysis, complete editorial control over publications, and no activities that would compromise my university position." Director Mitchell laughed. "Isabella, you've single-handedly changed how intelligence services work with academics. I think we can meet your terms." As Isabella prepared for what might be her final contribution to intelligence work, she reflected on the unexpected path that had led from her youthful recruitment as a graduate student to her current position as one of Europe's most respected art historians. The Vatican shield tattoo that had once been a symbol of her secret identity had become a bridge between two worlds that had long remained separate. By demonstrating that operational experience and academic scholarship could be ethically combined, she had helped create new possibilities for both intelligence professionals and historical researchers. 5 years after Isabella's revelation in the Hague courtroom, the Romano model had been adopted by universities and intelligence services throughout Europe and North America. Former operatives were pursuing academic careers in increasing numbers, bringing operational insights to intelligence studies programs while maintaining appropriate security protocols. Isabella continued teaching at the University of Rome, though her courses had evolved to reflect her unique background. Her Intelligence and Art Recovery seminar had become one of the most sought-after courses in the university's history department, attracting students from around the world. The Vatican Museum's case that had accidentally exposed her background had led to broader reforms in how international legal institutions obtained intelligence-related evidence. Courts now had established procedures for working with expert witnesses who possessed operational backgrounds, and intelligence services had developed guidelines for supporting academic research that served both scholarly and security interests. Isabella's academic work had expanded beyond historical analysis to include policy recommendations for improving intelligence accountability in cultural property cases. Her research on institutional practices during Operation Raphael had influenced reforms in how intelligence services coordinated with international organizations during cultural recovery efforts. On a winter evening in Rome, Isabella received an unexpected visitor. A young woman in her 20s knocked on her office door after hours, introducing herself as a graduate student in art history. "Professor Romano, I'm hoping you might provide some guidance about career decisions," the student said nervously. Isabella invited her to sit down, recognizing something familiar in the young woman's careful manner and alert intelligence. "I've been offered an opportunity to work for an international organization that monitors art trafficking networks," the student continued. The position would involve traveling to conflict zones and documenting cultural property crimes. Isabella studied the young woman carefully, noting details that reminded her of her own recruitment 40 years earlier: exceptional language skills, advanced degrees in relevant fields, and a combination of idealism and pragmatism that suggested suitability for complex work. This international organization, Isabella asked carefully, would it happen to require security clearances and involve reporting that might not be published immediately? The student nodded, understanding that Isabella had grasped the real nature of the opportunity. "Professor, I've read your work on intelligence operations and art recovery. If someone were to accept such a position, how would they maintain academic integrity while serving broader security interests?" Isabella smiled, recognizing herself at that age and understanding that the conversation was as much about recruitment as it was about career guidance. "The most important thing," Isabella replied, "is to remember that whatever role you choose, you must always be prepared to stand behind your work in public. Academic integrity and operational effectiveness are not contradictory if you maintain clear ethical standards." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Also, avoid permanent tattoos unless you're absolutely certain you want to explain them in court someday." As the student left, Isabella reflected on how much had changed since her own recruitment. The next generation of intelligence professionals would have the benefit of the frameworks she had helped develop, the legal precedents she had established, and the academic pathways she had pioneered. But they would also face new challenges that Isabella's generation had never anticipated. Digital surveillance, cyber warfare, and global terrorism required different approaches than the Cold War intelligence operations that had defined her career. As evening fell over Rome, Isabella walked through the ancient streets that had been her home for over 30 years. The city itself was a testament to the layering of history: Roman ruins supporting Renaissance palaces, medieval churches incorporating ancient columns, modern buildings nestled between structures that had stood for centuries. In many ways, her own life had followed a similar pattern. The intelligence operative had become the foundation for the academic, the classified experiences had informed the scholarly research, and the operational knowledge had enhanced rather than compromised the historical analysis. The Vatican shield tattoo that had once marked her as part of a secret program now served as a symbol of transparency and accountability. The skills that had made her an effective intelligence operative, attention to detail, pattern recognition, the ability to synthesize information from multiple sources, had also made her an exceptional academic. Her phone buzzed with a message from Director Mitchell: "New art trafficking network discovered using techniques similar to Operation Raphael protocols. Your analysis would be valuable." Isabella smiled as she typed her response: "Send me the files. I'll review them tonight and have a preliminary assessment ready by morning." Some missions never truly ended, they simply evolved into new forms. Isabella's commitment to protecting cultural heritage had begun as a classified intelligence operation and had become a lifelong academic pursuit. The methods had changed, but the fundamental purpose remained the same: ensuring that humanity's artistic legacy was preserved and protected for future generations. As she reached her apartment, Isabella looked back toward the Vatican, its dome illuminated against the night sky. Somewhere in those ancient walls were artworks that she had helped recover, authenticate, and protect. Some would eventually be returned to their rightful owners, others would remain in the Vatican's care as part of humanity's shared heritage. The secret operations that had once defined her life had become the foundation for open scholarship that would benefit generations of students and researchers. The Vatican Codex, as she had come to think of the hidden history she had helped preserve, was no longer a classified file locked away in intelligence archives. It had become an academic legacy that would continue to inform understanding of how intelligence operations, cultural preservation, and international justice intersected. Isabella Romano, former intelligence operative and current professor of art history, had found a way to serve truth in both its classified and public forms. The tattoo on her arm was no longer a secret to be hidden, but a bridge between worlds that had too long remained separate. In the end, that might be her greatest operational success, proving that transparency and security, scholarship and intelligence, could coexist and strengthen each other in service of larger truths. Have you ever wondered how many ordinary academics around you might have extraordinary hidden backgrounds? Share your thoughts in the comments about the importance of transparency in protecting our cultural heritage while maintaining necessary security. Subscribe to Silent Legends for more stories of hidden service that shaped our world.